So greetings and welcome to today's educational program, Transforming Organizational Culture, a PDCA approach by Eileen Serrano. She's the speaker of our talk tonight. I'm the moderator, Doug Wood, and I'll be handling the background on this one. She's got nearly 20 years of experience in the medical device industry, a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering and a master's degree in manufacturing engineering, with a specialization in quality management. She holds the ASQ Certified Quality Engineer, or CQE, the Six Sigma Black Belt, and the Certified Manager of Quality and Organizational Excellence. She's a senior member of ASQ, a past president of ASQ Puerto Rico. She's the Associate Regional Director of ASQ's South Atlantic region. She's a frequent speaker at international conferences, particularly ASQ World and Improvement Conference and Lean Six Sigma Conference. So I want to make sure that all of you understand, what we're going to do here. We will get started. Eileen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome everybody to this webinar, Transforming Organizational Culture, a PDCA Approach. This presentation is based on a real case based on my experience working with different organizations trying to transform organizational culture. And I think that sharing our experiences, sharing what we have learned in the process, it's important, and probably you can get some insights or inspirations to take back to your organizations. When we talk about organizational culture, it's one of the topics that has become prevalent in business studies, business magazines. There are many studies being made about the importance that organizational culture has in business results. When we talk about changing or transforming organizational culture, if you do a quick search on any magazine or any looking for papers about what organizations are looking for when changing or transforming culture, organizations are looking for different characteristics, different qualificatives, or different ways to define their cultures, and they're trying to develop a culture of curiosity, a high-performing organization, an agile organization, an innovation for creativity, innovation for quality, many different characteristics. The thing is that when we say we want to change our culture, we want to create a culture of continuous improvement, we want to create a quality culture, first of all, we need to understand what is organizational culture. In a way that we could say, most commonly we say that we refer to culture as the way we do things around here, the way people behave, the way people deal with each other, the way people relate. But when we think about organizational culture, it requires a little bit more than just the way things are done around here. When we think about culture, we think or we refer to the way a group of people, the people that form that business, that organization, work together, and they integrate the way of work to face, to solve, to deal with the problems they're having from the external factors and the situations they have internally. And when they are dealing with those situations, those problems they have from the outside factors or the internal factors, and they organize in a way and they face or address those problems, those situations in a way that they work. They consider those like the valid way or the right way to do things. And that's when people start thinking, people start perceiving or feeling about that way of work in such a way that they feel it's valid, it's effective, it's appropriate, and that's when things become the way the things are done around there. So it's not something that people just tell, let's do it this way. It's how the team, how the people, how that people understand, faces those problems, and because it works, because they see the results, they see the changes, they now start thinking, start behaving, or start feeling in such a way that that becomes culture. When we think about culture, it is composed with different elements, and I am adapting this slide from what Edgar Schein has defined as the elements of the organizational culture. Culture is composed by the artifacts. Those are the things that can be seen. It includes the architecture, the structure, the processes, such as logos, colors, symbols, behaviors, but also, and that's one of the things when you go to an organization you can see and you can perceive by your senses. But also you have what it's called or what it's considered the values. Those are the reasons or the way that the organization explains or defines their values, their roles, their responsibilities, their processes, and how they define their business strategies, and they deploy those strategies into objectives to the people. But in the center or at the core of the elements that compose the organizational culture are the basic assumptions. Those are the beliefs, the thoughts, perceptions, feelings, how people think, how people believe, and those are the things that are more difficult to perceive because, or not to perceive, but to explain, because those are the things that you don't get trained when you start working in a new company. Those are the things that you kind of like realize work the way they work because of the interaction that you're having. I usually tell the story that when I was working in other companies that I used to work, my first day at the job, when I start the very first day, the human resources manager greet me with a kiss on the cheek. And for the Latin culture, that's very common, but it's not common in a business setting or a corporate setting. And I was like impressed that she greeted me that way in the workplace. But then, as I was walking through the halls to get to my office, every single person that I met that day greeted me the same way with a kiss on the cheek. And then that happened on the very first at work, and it happened on the other day and the day after, and every single day, but with every single person from the general manager to the janitor. So the artifact or what I can see was that gesture, the way that they were greeting. But that was based on the values that we promote: a friendly environment, a familiar environment, that we want to have. One of the values was teamwork, was collaboration. But at the bottom of that was that they have this basic assumption that we were all a family, a big family. And it's interesting because if you are there, you see the artifact, you see the gesture, and probably you can understand the values because teamwork, you can explain that, and you can tell people that teamwork is important and collaboration is essential to reach the goals. But that thing that we've had that feeling, that belief that we are a big family, that's something that was not covered in the new hires, that was not covered in the policies, that was not covered in the procedure, but that was something that was really ingrained into the culture. So it's interesting to understand that culture has several elements, and it's like an onion. And what I'm trying to explain with this diagram that you're seeing on the screen is that artifacts is what you could see, but it's like an onion. You start peeling those skins, you go to the center, and that's how you understand how complex and how in-depth its organizational culture. So if you want to change something, it's important that we get to the root of what the organization believes. So when we talk about culture, it's important to understand that culture is a human phenomenon. It's a social aspect, and culture, to be culture, has to be shared. It's not something that happens because one individual or a few individuals perform. It's because many individuals, a large group of individuals in that group have the same behaviors. Also, it's something that is learned because through that daily interaction, either actively or passively, you learn how things are done. It is transmitted, and it's transmitted through the different generations of employees or individuals that work in that organization, because as people, it's been the new hires also learn how that it's performed, because that knowledge is transmitted. It's symbolic because artifacts have the same meaning for everyone in the organization. If we think about this gesture about the way we greet in the organization, it was symbolic because it meant that we were family, that we were friends when working together. So everyone in the organization understood that it has the same meaning. It was the same symbol. It is integrated because all the systems, all the tools, all the procedures, and the practices and the artifacts need to be cohesive or needs to talk to one another. There should be some resonance between the different elements, so it is integrated between all the elements that compose the organization, and also should be adaptable as those challenges and the environment and the environmental factors and the world we're living, everything it's changing. The culture needs to adapt. Think about the way we communicate now. A few years ago, the formal way that we talk to each other was either we call them over the phone or we send them an email. Now there are no, at least where I work, there are no phones any longer at the desk, because we use Zoom, we use Teams, or if we need to find someone right away, we just send them a message via WhatsApp or a text message. So the way that we communicate has changed. So I'm using that example about communication. Organizational culture needs to be adaptable, needs to change to respond to the different changes that happen to the organization. And when we talk about the organization needs to be adaptable, it comes to the bottom line. when we talk about transforming culture, it is possible. Well, think about the organizational culture, or let's state it this way. Organizational culture or culture is to the organization as personality is to the individual. So you don't wake up a morning saying, I want to be different, because you were raised, you have some education, and you have some traits that characterize who you are as an individual. The same way organizations have been shaped to a culture because of their leaders, because of the products, because of the conditions of the environment where that organization functions. So changing the organizational culture just to change it, it's not feasible, or is not what makes sense, because it's like us. We don't change our personality. We can change thinking as individuals, traits from our personality that probably are not helping us to achieve the goals that we have as individuals, or we take advantage of certain traits that we have as an individuals to achieve our goals. So the same way happens with organizational culture. So instead of thinking about transforming culture, we need to think about why we need to change culture. What for? What is that compelling reason that we need to do some changes? And in order to change culture, what we need to think is, what is the business problem that we're having? What is not working? Because at the end of the day, culture is what it is. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just culture. And it has some characteristics that, depending upon the situation, the external factors that affect that organization, those characteristics that define the organizational culture will help us succeed, or will make us difficult and take us out of business. So that's the importance of organization being adaptable. But to adapt the organization, we need to think about adapting, changing, transforming culture in the context of a business problem. And then it takes me to the topic or the idea behind this presentation. We're going to transform the culture, and if we have a problem, then we could follow PDCA in the context of problem solving to solve the organizational problem that we're facing that might require that we change or that we transform organization. So if we think about PDCA, we need to define a problem. We need to establish an objective that we wanna achieve. We need to find the root cause of that problem, and then once we understand what is the root cause, we develop solutions to solve the problem. And once we have those solutions, we implement those solutions, and we verify whether those solutions are successful or not. And we evaluate in that process how we did it, what were the results, and what was the process that we followed to implement those solutions. And then whatever works, we standardize that as the process, and if not, we start again another PDCA approach. So when we talk about culture, first of all, we need to think about what is a problem. And a problem is the difference between the current state and a desired state, where we are now, where we want to be. So if we think about the business, we need to think about what is our current business performance and what is the expected business performance. And if there is a difference between what we have and what we want, the current versus the desire, then that is the business problem that we need to solve. And we need to, once we have defined that business problem, we need to think about what are the causes of that problem. And once we understand the problem, we can think about the solution. And it's in determining the causes and the solution that we go and think about what aspects of culture needs to be transformed, needs to be changed. But we don't start saying, let's transform culture. We first need to think, what is the problem that we have? What is the cause of that problem? And when we think about the solution, it's where we think how culture or what aspects of the culture we need to change. So if we look this into an example, we need to define the problem and we need to set an objective. And let's suppose that we are seeing inconsistencies in process performance. And I'm using a generic description here so you can think about whatever is your organization or whatever is your context. So think about, there is a process that is inconsistent, but that is inconsistency we need in the future, or the desired state is that we want to increase our sales volume to achieve new markets. But with the current state, because in this example that I'm using, because we are inconsistent, we have the risk of losing customers because customers are not being served with the agility or the cost of or the level of quality or delivery that they are expecting. But if we want to increase volume, we want to acquire new markets, and we want to increase sales, then we need to think about the gap that we're having between what we have now and what we expect, because if we are inconsistent, we cannot think about probably increasing those volumes in sales. So when we think about the problem, we say, or we could state it like, why our performance is inconsistent? What is the current conditions that we have in our business performance today that it's preventing us for increasing our sales volumes? And we define an objective. Let's think that we want to bring our process to a level of stability, that we can obtain a consistent level of performance. And once we achieve that consistent level of performance, then we can think about sustained improvement. Let's state that as the objective. So we need to think about then what is the current state of the culture? How the culture is now? What are those traits that define the organizational culture? Let's think. Or let's imagine that we are seeing now that we are inconsistent, but we want to increase our volumes, but our culture, it's a competitive culture that is oriented to quick results and immediate, quick actions and immediate results. So if you read that statement, competitive culture oriented to quick actions and immediate results, you might think, oh my God, but what's the problem in there? We should be doing what we need because people is fast, people get results. But probably we need to analyze in the context that our organizational culture is characterized as quick actions with immediate results. How is that either helping to increase volumes, or it's hindering that we actually get that increase in volumes, or is promoting that we have an inconsistent process performance? And in that sense, you can do an analysis and like a 5 why, and think about why our performance is inconsistent. And you could say, for example, there is variation in results by work shift. Let's presume that we're working in a manufacturing setting, that we're having 3 shifts, and you're seeing differences between the performance from first shift to second shift to third shift. Then you ask yourself why there is variation in the results between shifts. And you say, oh, there is differences because people practices when dealing with machine problems are different. They have variation on the way they approach the problems. And you ask then why there is variation on the way people deal with those machine problems, and you say, because there is no standardized troubleshooting methodology, or no troubleshooting methodology has been established. And you ask why is not a standardized methodology being followed. And you could say, because people don't know or are not required to follow a standardized problem-solving methodology, or we might not even have it implemented. And you say why the standardized methodology is not followed, and you end up saying because people don't follow a standardized approach in problem solving because there is rush, and because there is rush, there is lack of analysis, and because there is lack of analysis, they are doing quick decisions, so they don't want to affect production because this culture wants to take quick action to get immediate results. And that's a moment where you realize that that characteristic of your culture, which is a very good characteristic, is causing or promoting the problem that you're having, because they want to be so fast, they want to get results so immediate that they are failing to do a thorough analysis. So when we go to following our PDCA approach, we define the problem, we establish the objective, we find out or we analyze the root cause. Now it's time to develop solutions. And when we think about solutions, and I'm talking about solutions in the context of organizational culture only, we need to think about, based on that root cause that I identify, what aspects of the culture need to be modified, need to be transformed, need to be changed. And now we're going to think about how we're going to change that culture, but not because changing the culture is what everybody is doing. We're going to change the culture because now we need to think how culture is affecting the business problem that we are seeing. So when we are going to develop solutions to counteract with that problem, we need to think about the aspects of the culture. We need to think about the values, we need to think about behaviors, and we need to think about systems and tools. Remember that values are related to what the organization has defined as part of their corporate identity, as part of the strategic plan. It's important for the organization, and each organization has different set of values. It depends on the business, it depends on the market, it depends on the customers, but values are unique to each organization. But values somehow are, let me see if I can find the right word. I would say that are intangible. Values may have different meanings to different people. When we talk about integrity, when we talk about respect, when we talk about teamwork, people might give different interpretations or different meanings to each of those values. So the important aspect here is that we need to think about what are the behaviors that people need to follow to ensure that they are modeling those values that we have defined as the corporate values. And also, once we have defined those behaviors, we need to think about what systems and what tools are required to enforce or to facilitate that people behave in the intended way that we expect aligned to the values, because in the way that people change their behavior, we're going to be changing culture. And it's important that we are specific about the behaviors that we want to see, because those behaviors need to be defined in a way or understood in a way on how they affect the problem that we're seeing, and how those behaviors need to change so we can solve the problem and obtain the results that we want to see in the future. So when we think about how we're gonna define those behaviors, we can do a brainstorming on what are the things or what are the behaviors that we're seeing in people that contribute to the problem that that we're having as a business. So we can brainstorm, list all the things that we are seeing in different instances where we are seeing the problem. And then we could do some multi-voting on determining which are the most important. And based on those behaviors that we see that contribute to the problem, we can come up with a set of different expected behaviors that are the positive or the contrary or the intended way of or the future state of behaviors that we want to see to address the problem that we are experiencing. When we are defining behaviors, it's important that we assess the organization in a holistic way. And I like to think, or I like to use the cause and effect diagram with a different flavor here and try to come up with solutions. What are the expected behaviors? So we need to think about solutions on what training, what skills people need to show the behaviors that we want to see, whether there are some changes that need to be done in the organizational structure and roles, responsibilities, whether we need to do some changes in the management style or their interactions. We need to also think about what information people need to have and make sure that information is accurate, accessible, current. We need to think about our processes, how we're going to improve, monitor those processes. And we also need to think about people's systems, how we recruit, how we develop, how we evaluate, how we recognize people. And thinking as an example, when I did this webinar in the Spanish version, I got a couple of questions about this particular slide, and I want to do the disclaimer that what I'm showing here, it's based on this example that I've been developing in my presentation. So we're thinking about in my example that we are having inconsistent performance, and that inconsistent performance is because people are not analyzing problems properly to develop solutions. So what I'm trying to say here is that we need to think about values, behaviors, systems, and tools. And these examples that I'm putting here are particular to this study that I'm explaining. But you need to think, if you're going to do this in your organization about what are the values, what are the behaviors, and what are the systems and tools that you need to implement for your context. But going back to my example, in this organization, let's assume that the values, the corporate values are integrity, inclusion, and results-oriented. And let's say that we're going to define a set of behaviors, and one of the behaviors that we expect people to see that we're not seeing but we want to see in the future is that we want people, for example, to say that people collaborate with their colleagues to identify root causes of the problem. And once they have identified root causes of the problem, then they work together to implement solutions. So that will address, that behavior addresses integrity, that addresses inclusion, that addresses results orientation. But once we define the behavior, we need to think about what systems or tools we need to implement from the organizational standpoint to support, to make sure that people behave in the way that we have stated there. For example, you can implement like quality circles. You can formally establish these multifunctional groups or these natural groups on which people sit together, think about their problems, they meet regularly, they establish plans to solve the problems they're seeing in the processes. We could also establish as a tool an A3 template for problem solving, and so people can follow a structured approach that can guide them from defining the problem, analyzing the problem, identify potential solutions, checking those solutions to determine whether they work or not, and then standardizing those solutions, and if not, they go back through the whole process. So we need to provide them with a template. Also, and those first two examples that are given there are related to the system tools and the practical or the quality aspects of problem solving. But from the social aspect, and this also supports behaviors, we need to think about how the human resources policies, how we manage our people, are being evaluated. So we need to think probably that to support that people collaborate with their colleagues, that we promote and that we implement performance evaluations with same objectives and same criteria, thinking in terms of a team instead of an individual, and making sure that if we define objectives from a collective point of view, we are all together in the same boat. If everybody wins, if one wins, everybody wins, but if one fails, everybody fails. So in that sense, we promote collaboration and we develop that thinking that we are all together in this. And also we need to make sure that we put some metrics to make sure that we are measuring from the business standpoint that the results that we are looking for are being obtained because people it's behaving the way that we are establishing. So this is the moment where you need to think about which are the new elements that need to be created or established from the cultural perspective to achieve the desired changes in behavior that we want to see in people. Once we have identified the solutions, we go to the check. In check, we verify how effective are those solutions, and we evaluate both the processes and the results, and how we do that. Let's say that we have defined behaviors. We need to train people, and we need to be clear on the expectations on what are those behaviors. We need to be explicit on what we expect from them as the appropriate behavior aligned to the values and aligned to the problem that we're trying to solve. And I want to stress again that for changing culture and defining behaviors, we need to do it in the context of the business problem, because think about personality. You don't change all aspects of your personality. If, for example, and I'm going back to the individual, if you as a person, you love to sleep late, you like to sleep 10, 12 hours, and then you get a new job, and you having partners at the other side of the world, and you need to wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning or 4 a.m. in the morning to be able to catch up for a conference call. But you love to sleep late. If you want to be successful in that role, you need to change the behavior on how much time we're going to sleep, and you either you sleep less or you change your sleeping patterns to accommodate to that particular requirement of being available to meet with your colleague, which is at the other side of the world, or you change your job. So when we talk about organization, we need to understand that we're going to change not all aspects of the organization, but those that are important to the business problem we're trying to solve. And when defining those behaviors, we need to provide people with the appropriate training on those behaviors that we want to see, and so people understand the expectations and understand how that looks like in the context of the job they're doing. And we need to have people practice and get their feedback on how they feel or how things could be better. And we need to assess the process, how that it's working. And based on that input, we need to go back and define what are the next steps we're going to follow. If everything is working fine, well, you have your behaviors defined, you have your system and tools, then you move forward to another topic or to another area of opportunity. But if what you are implementing is not working, then you need to go back and look what needs to be changed, what needs to be improved, what needs to be different. And remember, you don't have culture unless people adopt the way of work, and that requires not one individual or a few individuals. That requires many members, many individuals in the organization. So be open to provide training, be open to allow people to practice, to gather that feedback and to evaluate that. It's what's going to serve as a way to determine what should happen in the future. Once we have done the check, we go to standardize. To standardize those things that have worked fine, and if there are aspects that need to be improved, then we need to start the PDCA process again in another cycle to improve for those details that are not working quite as we expect. And I've been talking about this PDCA approach, and I've been thinking about culture, thinking as a quality engineer. But when you're thinking about changing culture, if you're investigating, for example, a problem in a manufacturing line and you're the quality engineer, you usually assemble a team of individuals from the manufacturing floor, people for quality, engineers, product experts, someone from marketing, depending upon the problem you're having. But when we're talking about culture, the team that we need to assemble to transform culture, those are the leaders of the organization, the top management, those individuals that establish the strategy, that are the ones who need to think about what is the shape they need to give, or how they need to shape the organization in the future to address the business problem they're having. So in this sense, the participation of the leaders is important, and they are the actual members of this problem-solving process. They are the ones who need to actually think about the problem, understand the problem, see the root cause, and define those behaviors, because they are the ones who need to start changing first. They are the ones that need to ensure that that tools are being implemented, and those tools are consistent with the environment they have, and those intangible aspects with the values, with the strategies. Also, leaders are important because they need to make sure that the objectives are defined as part of the strategies and the outcomes, and those objectives need to be focused focus on building the culture that needs to be created. One of the aspects that I have seen is that we define the actions, we define the objectives, but also we need to define how we're going to achieve that. And the how is usually based on the values and behaviors that we need to model. So when we define those objectives, we need to consider the elements, the cultural elements that we want to stress. Leaders are also important to provide coaching and training to cultivate or to develop that engagement that is required for all members of the organization. And leaders are meant to provide experiences that reinforce and that explain to subordinates and to other members of the organization on what is that culture that they are looking for to solve the business problems that they were facing. And last but not least, leaders are the ones who communicate and are the ones who are modeling. And they are modeling with behaviors. It's the same that happens with our children. We could say many things, but children are not listening to what we say, but what we do. Same thing happens with business leaders. You could say many things about the behaviors that you want to see, but leaders are the ones or the first people that need to model in the same way that we expect the rest of the organization to behave, and to make sure that those behaviors are enforced, and there's got to be some I can't find the right word in English, but you need to have the intention of doing things intentionally. You need to do things on purpose, and when thinking about transforming the organizational culture. So at the end, transforming culture is not an end, it's a journey, and we need to. When I say before at the beginning of the talk about culture needs to be adaptable, we need to be organizational leaders, and we as leaders need to be thinking about the problems that we are facing, because organizational culture is what it is. But depending upon the challenges that we face from the outside, we need to become adaptable. And whenever new challenges affects the organization, we need to think about how we need to transform to be able to face those challenges. And sometimes culture is going to be the problem that it's hindering us from achieving the expected results, but sometimes, and many other times, culture will be that competitive advantage that will help us achieve those desired results for the future. Summarizing, what I can summarize as my learnings in this process. First of all, that uh, culture can be transformed if we think about it as a problem, and we can apply a problem-solving approach using the tools of quality. And as you have seen in my presentation, we're talking about a people problem because culture is a people, it's a human phenomenon. But you can deal with that if you define it, but as a problem, but in the context of the business. And you can think about how you're going to change that using the tools of quality. Second, to change culture, it's important that we think about what are those aspects of the culture that help or hinder how we address, how we face those business problems that organization will face. And third, or last but not least, transforming culture is not about bringing in consultants or changing procedures, changing processes, or changing technology. Those are artifacts. Those are components of the culture. But what really, really changes culture, what really makes a difference, what really make sure that we face properly or effectively the business problems is that we change behaviors. Once people start changing their behaviors, that's how organizational culture is transformed, and that is how it is sustained for the future. So I guess this is the end. I'm open to comments, to questions. I'm looking forward to listen to those, Doug.
Okay, thank you, Eileen. We've had a number of really wonderful questions come out of this. I want to thank everybody for that. And again, if we don't quite get to your questions, send her an email. You'll get her email address in the note that comes in 2 days. So let's start off here with one of the first ones. You know, the one comment was they loved your example of being greeted with a kiss on the cheek. That was a marvelous way of explaining a cultural situation. And then we've got a couple here from Orlando. He says, in the organizational culture change, what about changing the mindset? Is it a linear approach, or is it an exponential approach? And he also mentions how can you shift from a scarcity-based thinking to an abundance-based solution? What do you think about that?
It's a matter of changing behaviors. You cannot change the way people think. There is no machine for that. But you can change the way of work, changing the way people do things. When people start seeing that changing that behavior results are different, then you start changing the mindset. It's the way you're dieting. You know that you need to lose weight and you need to control your carbs, for example, and you know that. But still you eat those chips, you love bread, you love pizza. But when you start seeing that if you change your habit of eating carbs and you start exercising and then you start weighing yourself and you're seeing that your pants are looser, then you're changing your mindset and you're transforming yourself into a healthier version. The same thing happens with organization. You need to do the change management in the sense that people understand why we're doing this and why we need them to behave differently. And once they start doing things differently, it's when the mindset it's gonna happen that you could actually make them believe. And that's how culture. That's one of the definitions of culture. When people start seeing that way of work it's working, then they change. It becomes the correct way of perceiving, feeling, and thinking.
Okay, I think you answered the second one from him. He said, talking about an organization's immune system, which is a barrier to change. But I think you answered that by saying if you can demonstrate the improvement, that will overcome the resistance to change, an immune system in an organization. So.
And it's important that to change, it's not because I want to, it's because we need to, and we need to in the context of a business problem. It's the other way around. It's because we have a problem that we're going to change culture, not we're going to change culture just because. That's my side on that.
Yeah, there has to be a reason. Okay, let's see. Another question here was someone commenting about a North American culture. If you went through kissing everybody at work, it would take on a whole other meaning. He said, but one organizational culture will attract some and repel others. Is culture and culture fit a big HR management issue?
My experience has been that it's no longer an HR issue. It's an organizational issue, and every leader, regardless of the function that you're dealing, needs to take a call in culture. If remember, leaders are not in HR. Leaders are everywhere, and if we want to transform, and you want to make sure that the systems and tools resonate with the culture that we want to establish, usually those happen in procedures, in technology, and that happens everywhere at the organization. So I would say that the scope of thinking that it's a big HR problem, it's understated. Now it's something to everyone who is a leader, regardless of the function of the organization, in their organization.
Okay, yeah, everybody has an impact. You did mention, however, that the lead on this needs to be taken by the leadership of the organization because they set the tone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, and it's interesting, and I am a quality engineer at heart, and I was leading an operational excellence program, and my role. I was an informal leader because I wasn't a manager or at that moment we did this, but my role was to facilitate the process with the leader to think about in an organized way on how to transform culture. So it's interesting and how they are the main characters, but we can support them into this new way of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. All right, so here's a good one, I think. How can you say that earlier in your talk you said culture is neither good nor bad, but this person says, she goes, bad culture can ruin a business. Transforming, is of course a way to improve the culture. When you said culture is neither good nor bad, I think you were hinting at, people's cultures is what they are, and you can't blame a culture as being bad unless it has impact.
It's the same that happens with personality. You're not either good or bad. It's the actions that you take what makes you good or bad, or makes you do bad things. So when we talk about culture, it's probably that the way that the organization or traits within the organization are not helping in achieve the results that are required. So it's important that we raise awareness on what are those traits that are bad, and we change those, because culture is like personality. You are who you are. So organizational culture, it is what it is, but there are aspects that are the ones that need to be modified and adapted to improve results.
Okay, very good. So a couple more questions before we close. We're going to run a little long tonight. That's okay. Gary asks a question. I'm curious whether Eileen is aware of differences in adaptability or willingness to transform organizational culture in the United States or Canada or in Latin American regions? And are there any known differences across the continent about willingness to transform?
I cannot talk about that because I haven't studied that in particular, considering different geographical locations. But I would say that it's a matter of business to survive. That as in the same way that we change our technology, that we change our business strategies, that we think about how people it's behaving in the organization and what is the culture to be competitive. And it's a matter of being an organization rather than the geographical aspect, which I cannot talk, but I would think it's an interesting area for further investigation.
Okay, great. I'm afraid we're going to have to just one more question here. This one's interesting too, from Nisha. She says, in recent times, people keep on switching companies. So how can the management maintain the cultural and behavioral attitudes in their organization as the employees themselves are coming and going?
It's important that when that new hire, that onboarding process happens, that people are being explicitly informed about expectations with the values, the behaviors, and systems and tools. But also, it's important that when we do that interview process of bringing in new employees, that we look for people with a set of attitudes that will match the existing culture. And also, it is important to think that if we have a high turnover of people leaving the organization, that we think about what is going on with the culture that is promoting that people leave the organization. So it's a matter of thinking about what we can do better to retain employees, but also a matter of when we hire them, that we look for the fit. And also, once we have them here, that we do a proper onboarding process so they can work and understand the expected behaviors.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for this talk. We're going to stop the recording now, and then a couple more closing items. All right?
I just want to